Friendship Magic Podcast, the podcast that looks at all things pop culture and fandom through the lens of social science and experience. I'm joined today by some wonderful people. We're going to have a great discussion here. We're going to talk about not just the fandoms of regular pop culture and bronies and whatnot, but we're also going to be talking, bridging that gap between us and sports fandoms as well. So for the conversation, I have joining with me today the lovely and talented Miss Nova Rose.
Howdy, howdy.
And we've got two wonderful special guests joining us today. Want to introduce the master of Fuff, the riffer of ponies, Mr. Thoth Penswell.
Wonderful is a strong word. But no, hi, I'm Thoth Penswell. I'm one half of Rift Ponies. I'm the less talented half, but yeah, I'm Thoth Penswell. I do video editing. I moderate a lot of different pony servers, and I help run Rift Ponies. So it's great to be here to finally talk about some sports with pony people. I don't get the opportunity to do that often, so I'm really excited.
Definitely. And also joining us today, another wonderful guy, great friend, Mr. Balto Racing joining us today.
Oh man, you're trying to make me blush over here. Good morning, afternoon, evening, night, overnight, whenever you listen to this. This is Balto Racing. I have been a brony for over 9 years, so I'm one of those that have been there almost since the beginning, and I am also the lead organizer for the local DC Bronies group. I am also a sports brony, which again, there ain't a whole lot of us, and there especially isn't a whole lot of us that watch racing. So I can bring a little different perspective for you guys tonight, but I am so excited to be on here.
All right, thank you. And as always, of course, I'm your host, Forward Progress. So let's dive right into the conversation here. So what I want to open up and ask you guys here, and you each touched upon it here, is the fact that there doesn't seem to be that much overlap where you see that many sports fans within the other pop culture fandoms, within, the brony community, within anime communities, etc. Unless, of course, we're watching sports anime, but that's a whole other. Free is great, Muri on Ice is great, but that's another thing. Anyway,
The buttball anime.
We're already beginning to see this overlap.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but let me ask you guys, the two of you to start with here, what is it like being somebody who's in both communities, being a sports fan within, like the brony community and any other pop culture communities you find yourselves in?
You know, it's so funny. You can see a little bit of overlap in between those two fandoms, especially with the passion that you bring in. It's something that you love so much, and you want to show that love that you have for that show or for that team or for that driver or what have you. You want to show that to people. So in some ways, it's like it's so similar, but in different ways. Some people look on the outside, it's like, how in the world can you love ponies and you can also watch NASCAR? It's like, how could those two go together? But you know what? It makes who you are, and it's so cool. Now, going to conventions, it's so funny. It reminds me of going to a sporting game. You see whose favorite pony or whose favorite character or whatever that you see at a convention. People are not afraid to show it, and that's one thing that is so cool to see. Is just how similar those two kind of entities are together.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story that I always tell where back in the day when I was on like a random Discord server where it was made up of bronies, furries, everybody who was into different pieces of animation, Western animation, what have you. I don't want to say that they bullied me because it's not bullying. We were all friends. I promise I wasn't being bullied. But when I revealed that it was really into sports and was really into like baseball, football, whatever, the dynamic kind of turned from where we're all into this really nerdy fandom-y thing, and it turned into, what, you're into sports? You watch baseball? You watch sports? What a nerd. And it was so interesting to see that switch of, the dynamic that there always is between the old jock and nerd kind of dynamic, where it spun and was like, oh, now we're all into fandom stuff, but now that I'm into sports, I'm the nerd, you know. So it's really I see a lot of crossover between it, as you put it. Um, it's being a fan of like a sports team to me, and taking that team, and that's a big part of what you do, to me has never really been any different from, oh, I'm going to a convention and I'm going to dress as a character because this is a part of my identity. So both ways you're a fan. And I think that's what I really see as the similarities between the two.
Mm-hmm. So, for you, Nova Rose, I know you're not a big fan of professional sports, at least not currently.
I definitely don't watch it.
But I mean, you do have some history with sports in your life, of course.
Yeah, I actually, when I was little, I did Little League baseball, which was a lot of fun. I think I did that up until middle school, probably. I loved, like, playing the game. It was a lot of fun.
So for you, is it more of a thing when it comes to sports of you're more of I want to be active and playing than, say, I want to be watching?
I definitely, either want to be playing or actually be there physically.
So, but while we're talking with you on this, as somebody who has played but isn't really I would say that you wouldn't place yourself as a sports fan necessarily.
Yeah, no, if it's on and there's people around me that are watching and whatever, then I'll get into it, and I know enough about certain sports to kind of know what's going on, but I don't seek it out, and, like, I don't buy the merchandise.
So that being said, so as somebody who's more of, like, an outsider as far as the realm of sports fandom, when you're looking in as a member of other fandoms in on this from the outside, kind of what's your take in general of sports fandoms?
It's really difficult to say, because I know my brother actually used to go do marching band, so he would be in the stands playing music or whatever during our football games. So every once in a while we would actually go to the game and watch, and I loved that home atmosphere, and just everyone, friends and just people I go to school with or whatever, just kind of cheering on. But I feel like that atmosphere is so much different than if I were to, say, go to a New York Yankees game, where people get really, really intense. And then don't even get me started about soccer. Oh my gosh, I think it's a dull occasion if there isn't a fight or three. Y'all be passionate, people.
So I mean, obviously, there's something to be said about in fandoms in general involve passion. I mean, granted, we see a lot of passion in all kinds of fandom, regardless of what it is in pop culture. You know, we see it in the brony community. We see it in anime fandoms. Like, people get really into their stuff and their shows. So, looking at that, is there really that much of a difference between the intensity of it, or do you, as somebody looking on the outside, would you put it on a different level?
I guess one of my things is, looking at, say, the Phillies. If they win, then Philadelphia burns. If they lose, Philadelphia still burns. So it's I would never flip a police car because Twilight got wings. I don't necessarily see that level or that intensity over fandom stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think the worst of the worst I've seen is death threats over the internet, but it kind of stops there.
Okay. So, switching gears a little bit here, one thing that is an interesting topic of conversation, I'll open this up to everybody here, is we've kind of talked a little bit about that there's parallels too between, and you've mentioned it a little bit, Rose, of parallels between what you can see in pop culture fandoms and what you see in sports fandoms. And obviously, sports is part of pop culture. It's just the easiest way I think I can delineate between the two here. Is there's this growth in analytics that has been happening in sports, most certainly over time. I'd say over the last 10 to 15 years, especially, where a lot of people look at that as where it's like, oh, the nerds are getting into sports now. And I don't know if that's necessarily fair to say or not, but it's definitely a thing where there's different ways to look at it. So I'll open that up to everybody if you want to talk a little bit about, your kind of view of how is the realm of analytics changing that barrier between sports and the rest of pop culture.
There was an episode of something, I think, about this, but I can't remember, where part of me wants to go say The Simpsons, where the super smart person is like, I'm gonna join the baseball team, but then she took the fun out of it, where it's like everything was just math and numbers, and it's like
there's definitely a level of math and numbers though that is in the games at this point, because that is how the teams get ahead. That's how they succeed now, and it's the new way of doing things. And definitely, I think you guys can definitely speak to what you've seen throughout.
Well, I could start on it. It's funny because it really has, analytics has really become a major part of sports talk in general, where back in the day with something like baseball, because I keep talking, I guess I'm going to be the baseball guy for today. It really was, there was a hyper focus on the really just concrete stats that you could read. It was batting average, home runs, runs batted in, runs, etc. It was really like, those were the stats that you looked at to determine a great player. Then you had the pardon if I get this name wrong, you had the Michael Lewis novel Moneyball come out, which was later turned into a movie. Both are really great. Of course, I'm bringing up movies right now, but both are really fantastic. I highly recommend reading the book and watching the movie because they're both great. And that really introduced the analytics of what's called, in baseball at least, that may be called something different in other sports, but they call that sabermetrics in baseball. And what that basically is it's different. It's even more intricate stats that determine a player's value, what they do, where they hit it, where their play most affects the game. And that definitely, like you said, Forward, it definitely bridges that gap where now you have the mathematics side really playing into how teams look at their players, look at their player development. And a lot of that is credited towards the book Moneyball and the stuff that the general manager of the Oakland Athletics, which that book and the movie both cover, Billy Beane, where it covers looking at the game in that different perspective. And now a lot of teams have adopted that to a point where broadcasts cover it, everybody covers it, everybody looks at it. It's the new thing that everybody looks at. So in that way, analytics and mathematics have breached into sports now, and it really kind of coexists. So absolutely, there's definitely a bridging of the gap between the, I don't want to generalize it, but the jock side of things and the nerd side of things. It definitely meets in the middle there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's a delicate balance of what your eyes are seeing and then what the math is saying. You got to balance that out. And the people and the teams and the organizations that balance that out together are the ones that are usually the most successful.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the teams that have adopted that and have adopted that strategy, you've seen a lot of their success over the years. I'm just going to throw names out, sorry. The Oakland A's, the Kansas City Royals, they won a World Series doing that, went to 2 in a row.
Yes, Kansas City. Kansas City came out of nowhere there.
Yeah, and that was just having the right players, the right people that they grew in their farm system, and a lot of that was analytical. because you wouldn't look at that team, to me at least, you wouldn't look at the Kansas City Royals that year and say, yeah, that's a World Series winning roster. But they had
Until
the
you got to
right.
that bullpen, then it's like, oh my gosh.
Oh, it was murderer's row in that bullpen. I wish I had that bullpen, but yeah, but that was the thing that really started the focus that teams now have, because you still see it today in MLB. That started the focus on bullpen, and it started the focus on relief pitching and bridging those games, because now there's not a lack of focus, but there's less importance played on starting pitching. But yeah, it is so interesting, and listening to me speak all this gobbledygook now, that's what makes it really interesting, and that's what makes us fans of this, because there is a way of an analysis to it. It's great. I love it.
It's the nuts and bolts, no pun intended.
Yeah, seriously though.
It's been interesting over the years since I was a child, and I first started watching sports, and seeing how things have evolved, even just in my lifetime, of different roles, positions, this and that. And I would say some for the positive, and I would say some for the negative as well. Because there's a lot right now where we need to be probably even taking a closer look at certain things than we actually are within sports. Obviously, you have the issue of concussion, specifically with the NFL. But also MLB also dealt with concussion issues as well, when they were taking a look a few years back about plate collisions.
Yeah. I to speak to that a little bit. Two players that were on two of the teams I followed were kind of directly involved with that, which is to say Francisco Cervelli and Scott Cousins. Francisco Cervelli, I'm just going to start dropping names. Here we go. Here it is. This is me. Francisco Cervelli was a backup catcher for the New York Yankees. He had a problem with concussions, where he had multiple ones that threatened his career multiple times, to a point where they told him that he should probably retire because of that. He ended up having to wear a helmet multiple times throughout his career that was about twice the size of a normal helmet. I don't know if you could still find pictures of this, but it was interesting to see as they kind of built along in that process. The other player was Scott Cousins, back when the Miami Marlins were the Florida Marlins. Home plate collision between him and Buster Posey that essentially ended Buster Posey's season. Not even essentially, it did. It ended all-star catcher Buster Posey for the San Francisco Giants. It ended his season right after he had an MVP season. And what ended up happening, that was kind of the impetus that started a lot of the concussion protocol stuff, which, it's not as open and very concentrated on now. But I remember the years following that where, they changed the rules about home plate. And when you change rules in baseball, people get angry. I know it. I've seen it. And sometimes I get a little bit upset when they change certain things, where I'm like, you didn't really need to change that. But when it comes to preserving players' health in that regard, you don't want catchers getting the All-Star game. I'm going into baseball history. Oh boy, this is gonna be a long night forward. I'm telling you, man. But you don't want guys like Pete Rose in the All-Star game 20, 30, 40 years ago, where he clobbers a guy at home in a game that means nothing, and you essentially end a guy's career over that. It's so definitely a lot of the protocols, and definitely that concentration on concussions, because it was a thing that was kind of not really covered and was kind of brushed under the rug for quite a while. It's good that there is focus on that now, and that there is initiative to make sure that that is, even if it is a risk in the game, because I know a lot of people say, if you go into something like football, you're going to get a concussion. Well, fair, but that doesn't mean that you don't try and get as much safety involved in it as possible, because otherwise you could impair people for life.
Right, and I'll take that a step further on my end when it comes to racing. I think for me, it's like, it's been 20 years, especially since Earnhardt's death, and I think some people have forgotten just how dangerous our thing is. It's like, yeah, you can get injured, but quite frankly, you can get killed doing this. And I don't even have to go that far back. We can just go as far back as the 500 earlier this year with Ryan Newman and that just horrendously awful crash. Everything that we've done the last 20 years safety basically went into that whole accident and how Ryan Newman survived that accident. He has like a bar inside of that race car even before that crash that was named the Newman bar, and that came from Talladega in 2009 when he landed on his roof. So a lot of things were common were culminating to that moment. The safer barriers, the Hans device, the bigger cars, everything on the side of foam on the side of the cars, like everything culminated to that moment. So it's not just a safety thing for like the drivers, also the pit crew members also have helmets on their heads to make sure that nothing happens there. I can remember back to 2001 in Homestead that a couple of Ricky Rudd's crew members got seriously injured, and after that they wore helmets from now on. But it doesn't matter what sport it is. You want to keep your entity safe, and especially in our sport, because it's not just the drivers, it's also the sponsors that go into this, and it's multi-million dollars, and something happens to your multi-million dollar athlete, it trickles down to pretty bad things. So you got to protect that at all costs.
One thing you brought up there, Thoth, that I want to touch upon is about the concept of rule changes and adjustments that are having to be made, and fan and fandom reaction to those changes, and the concept of fan vitriol. And speaking to kind of bring it back a little bit of a balance here of in everyone's opinion here, when you look at vitriol within sports fandoms and then you look at vitriol within other pop culture fandoms, where do you think that comparison lies within them? Do you find it to be even? Do you find differences, similarities, etc. within there?
People are scared of change. I think that's the biggest thing. You get so used to something for so long, and then when something changes, it's like it just throws you for a complete loop. And I think the most obvious example, going back to ponies, is when Twilight Sparkle got her wings. I remember when that happened. It was like DEFCON 5. It was like, oh my God, how could this happen?
That
Why
was
would you let that happen?
that was the first time that the fandom was dead.
Right.
Been dead about 9 times since, but that was the first time it was dead.
Well, and that's, and we've had that just in the Brony fandom, but also other fandoms. A few episodes ago, we had Brass Robo on to talk about what I call legacy properties, and properties that have been around for a long time, things like Star Wars, Star Trek. And he spoke to Doctor Who and about how every so many years they have a complete reset, new doctor, new, and all this stuff. So these things keep coming up within fandom here, obviously, but it is one of those things where in a fandom where you're viewing a property, it's a matter of things like changes of a new actor gets hired, or it's the way a script was written, or Twilight got wings, or Hasbro wants to sell more toys, or whatever have you that gets thrown out. And we could talk all day on that.
Right.
But
I think. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, you were going.
I was gonna say, I think there's definitely the comparison that we're orbiting toward is something is that similar to those pop culture properties. Say when they decided that the next Doctor was going to be a woman, was going to be Jodie Whittaker, or when Twilight got her wings, when it had been said in every show Bible and everything that Lauren Faust said that she didn't want her to become a princess. I see something very comparable in that of when the NFL or the MLB changes a rule that's been long standing. I think honestly, that's the term of that, of rule change, could easily be interchangeable with something that in a pop culture property that is set in stone. a rule change could be, oh, well, the doctor is not supposed to be a woman. It's always been a guy. It's always going to be a guy. Always going to be a male. And then it wasn't. It was a rule change. They changed it. And you obviously have people who are purists who they've grown up with it all. They've grown up with a television property all of their life, knowing that was the way it was. They've grown up with this game that they've grown up for decades, knowing that was the way it was. And I think there is something comparable in that sensation where it's like this thing, as Balto put it best, it's people don't like change, and when people like something a lot, they really care about it a lot. When you change it, whether it be an actor, whether it be a storyline, a character, a dynamic, or a rule that you've known for a long time in a sport, there's definitely apprehension to that, and there will be understanding from some people. I mean, for example, for me, a recent thing that they've been throwing around in baseball with this really weird 2020 season, they've been doing double headers to get these games in that are 7 innings each rather than the 9. Now they're talking about, oh, well, there's been publications out that have been going, oh, well, maybe they should do 7 innings for forever. They should do 7 innings for all games.
No.
And I remember I can admit, me as a person who really cares about baseball and some rules, I'm really like, that is baseball to me. Mm-hmm. When I heard that, admittedly, I went, I hate that idea. Please don't do that. But
it's just like having the runner on second base in extra innings, right?
Oh no, don't put me into that, man. But we're exemplifying it right there, really, is we don't like changes to things that we think work or have been around and that we've known for years. It really just is. We, as human beings, are naturally afraid of change, whether it be good or bad. And I mean, I could talk to you until the cows come home about the changes that someone like Rob Manfred has instituted in the MLB in the last few years. I could type you a whole essay about that, but I won't. And I will say
we could do that about every commissioner, though.
Yeah, we could also say
Don't
that.
get me started on NASCAR. We have books upon books for that one.
Oh, I can imagine. But yeah, the bottom line, to go back to the point that you made forward, is that I definitely see a comparison to be made between when something changes about the canon that is long established and people don't like, is very similar to when you're playing a game, when you're watching a sport, a major league sport, and a rule is changed, and it's like, well, we don't like that. That's not what we've liked for the last 10, 20, 30, 100 years, Mm-hmm. Yeah, so totally. I can totally see that comparable.
Now, the one thing that this kind of brought to mind for me here is there's the reaction to rule changes. There's also the reaction to great losses and great wins, I'll call them. The big time games and I almost want to use the word fallout afterwards.
You're talking about the Super Bowl, aren't you?
Well, so Rose and I here live about an hour and a half outside of Philadelphia.
I know where this is going. Just saying.
Something is about to fly, and it starts with a letter E.
Yeah.
It's with a letter S.
So a couple of years ago, the Eagles won the Super Bowl. After many years of trial and failure, we'll just say. But both of us got to watch Philadelphia get flooded with people for weeks, actually, because it wasn't just the Super Bowl, it was also the playoff games. To the point where the police greased the light poles so people wouldn't climb on them.
Yeah.
Didn't stop people.
They still climbed on them. So
That city burned.
well, and that's the thing, and as somebody who's not a sports fan, honey, and we're gonna get into different perspectives on this, but somebody who's not a sports fan, when you look at that, what is your reaction?
So I guess this goes back to one of the initial questions that you asked earlier, is like me kind of looking into the sports fandom, and there's like, I'm passionate about the things I like or whatever, but I would never flip over a police car like because Twilight got wings. Like, it's one of those things where I'm like, it almost seems like sports fans are just really into sports. Like, it becomes part of their life, which, granted, it's kind of part of our lives as far as like nerd media, but it's like, I don't know, it feels so much different.
And I think that's the thing.
No, that's fair.
Is there's a lot of differences and a lot of similarities, I feel, too. And I think we're touching upon a lot of this right now. So I actually remember after that, I actually had a good friend of mine who, the shop that she worked in, they had completely, everybody who stormed the streets in Philadelphia completely smashed out the entire storefront of the store she worked in. So she couldn't work for a little, and then they had to come back to work to clean it up and rebuild. And apparently people still wanted to come in and shop too on top of that.
Oh, wow.
Like,
Yikes.
can you not see that our window was busted open? You
can trust me.
But
So,
I definitely have some points I want to make of my theories here, but I want to get your guys' take here on
Sure.
what it is that spawns such a reaction. And the thing about it is that there is the positive and the negative too, where it is similar things seem to happen around great victories and great defeats.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I could speak from personal experience. For people that are friends with me on Facebook or follow me on Twitter, you will know how Chase Elliott does. It's either he has a good race or he has a really bad one. I don't hold back. I think that's very obvious.
I was gonna say, I don't even follow NASCAR, but when I see all caps and I see a Balto on my feed, I know one of two things has happened. And I'm like, oh.
Right. It's just, it truly does become part of your life, and it goes back to what you were saying. Those worst defeats, but also those greatest victories. It really means something to you. And I'll give you a perfect example. Like last September, I was in between jobs. I was financially not in the best position. It was a lot of stress in my life, but I had the chance to go down to Charlotte for the Bank of America Roval 400, and I was in attendance for that. And I think that race for Chase Elliott was just the perfect microcosm of what I was going through. He was dominating that race, go on a restart, going to turn one, goes right into tire barrier. A really bad unforced error, but you know what? He got his butt back up and he went from 37. He drove his butt right back to lead and won that thing. And when he won that race, I'm like, oh my God, I can't feel like I could quit now. If he could do that, shoot, I need to get my butt up and get myself another job and get myself back going again. And like less than a month later, I got a new job at this new place I'm at, and now they're talking about me becoming a manager. So it's like, it could really springboard you to great things if you see your driver or your team do something great. Obviously the other way around is if something really bad happens to where it's like you're close and then all of a sudden something stupid happens and you lose, then it could really affect you for the next week, and it's like, don't talk to me.
There's a sense of, I think, identity that happens here. And I think it happens both in nerd culture, and I want a better word for it than nerd culture, but I'm at a loss at the moment. But, just in general pop culture fandoms, there's a lot of sense of identity. Heck, I wrote a whole paper on identity within the Brony fandom. But there's definitely it in sports. And there's a lot here with it where there is a sense of, and I think in particular because teams are based in a specific city, and they're given the identity that they are of that city. You know, they are the New York Yankees. They are the Philadelphia Eagles. They are, whatever have you. Where geographically, for one thing, you start to develop that identity, and then it becomes the sense of it's not them, it's us.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. I will say I'll weigh in on this. Number one, I just want to say right off the bat, I think all the flipping cars over and the rioting and breaking stuff, whether your team wins or loses a championship, I think that's dumb. I've never
Yeah.
been a fan of that. I've never been a fan of it. Whenever
That'd be
people,
a dumb reason to get arrested for too. It's like
that
that stays on your record, just so you know.
yeah, I mean, I've looked at it, and when people post about it, I look at it and I go, yeah, that's really stupid. And it's interesting because we can say that, and at the same time, I also sit there and I go, yeah, but there's also a precedence of it, and that's unfortunate. But that's a whole other subject. That's a whole other thing I can't even begin to go into right now. But touching on that point that Balto and Ford that you both made, yeah, I mean, it's similar to like a fandom thing where it's an entire community, whether that be 10,000 people or that be an entire city, a geographic area. You become that team, and that team becomes you in a way. I think it's comparable to when, like we were making the comparison earlier about jerseys and cosplay. When you like a character enough, or you identify with that character, you want to cosplay as them and dress as them because that's fun, and that character, you are that character. In that same way, if you're buying a jersey for a player you really like, or just a team that you really love, when you win, when they win, you win. That's like, it's the greatest feeling in the world when when you're at when I'm at Yankee Stadium and the Yankees win the game and Frank Sinatra plays, and it's like, yeah, we won that. That was great. And then when you lose, it's like, God damn it, it's
And you get someone on Twitter playing with David Ortiz, like the Yankees lose.
yeah, exactly. But that really stings. It's interesting. It stings for only a little bit because then you play another game the next day, whether it be, or unless it's football where you wait a week, and that really
Right.
stings. But I think there is definitely something to that both of you said, that there is that sort of ideology, I guess, where it's like that team represents you and millions of other people. So in that sense, that's you winning that. And when you win the World Series or the Super Bowl or the Stanley Cup, whatever it may be, that's a personal feeling just as much. And that can bring a whole city and community together. And that's really an incredible thing. And that's comparable to like something like, I'm trying to think of a comparison. Kind of like, this is a weird comparison, but stay with me here. It's kind of like when the St. Louis Blues their fans united around this Laura Branigan song from the 1980s. It's just totally random, but it's kind of like when there's like a convention meme and everyone knows it, and it's like a rallying cry. It's great. It's like a fight song. There's so many different machinations. There's so many different machinations to it, to this point that I'm trying to make, so I'm not making it too clearly. But the point that I am kind of just bouncing off of you guys is that, yeah, it really is that it becomes kind of like a fandom does, and kind of like a TV show can, like me, where now I'm all horse forever.
All horse all the time.
All horse all the time. That's me. But yeah, it can become a part of your life and become a part of you. I mean, speaking for me, I have a DVD Blu-ray collection that sits behind me on 2 different shelves, and I cannot lie to you, literally sitting next to each other, there's all of my Pony DVDs and Blu-rays. Right next to that is a giant collection of New York Yankee DVDs. So it kind of illustrates it does become a part of you, and that's why people will react so strongly when something like that happens. And that does not validate it. Like I said, I think it's dumb either way, But that definitely is the explanation behind it, rather than just, oh, well, they do it because they just want to break shit. Some of them do, fair enough, but a lot of it is, yeah, they're that into it. It's crazy, but it's true. They're that into it.
Right. It's their way of saying, "Oh my God, I'm so happy," but I'm like thinking on the outside, "What the heck are you doing?"
It's true.
Some of it is alcohol driven. Let's be honest.
I was gonna say alcohol also helps, you know.
I can promise you, I have run into quite a few drunk people at racetracks, and a lot of things I've seen, I cannot repeat on this program. Absolutely cannot repeat on this program.
What is the old saying? Alcohol, the cause of and solution to most of life's problems.
Yeah.
That is true. And hey, wins and losses when the New York Giants win or lose on Sunday, it makes the reaction so much stronger.
Yeah.
If you have some alcohol in you, or it takes it away, takes the edge off. You never know. We here at Keeping Friendship Magic do not advocate alcohol use or alcohol.
Please drink responsibly.
Yes, drink responsibly.
So, gosh, so many ways to go here. So, one thing here, and I'm gonna get into a little science here. So, sports is a great thing to study if you're a social scientist. I will tell you, sports and sports fandoms are fantastic.
We give you a lot of material.
oh yes. So there's these concepts of, and it sounds weird, burgeoning and corfing, which really sounds weird, but I'll break down what they mean. So Burge stands for basking in reflective glory. So what that is where, as a sports fan in particular, but this also I feel applies to fandom here, is when the team succeeds, when your favorite racer succeeds, when the show you love is doing gangbusters and getting recognition for good things. You take it within. You're basking in it. You're taking it and taking it in and of yourself and saying, I am a part of this. I am in this. This is like, we did this. I am part of what made this happen. Even though all you're usually doing is just turning it on, or maybe buying a jersey, or like going to a convention or whatever, but you're not actually on the team, or you're not actually writing the show or doing the storyboards or whatever. It's still a we. And then there is corfing, which stands for cutting off reflective failure, which essentially is when something screws up, it's not we screwed up, it's they screwed up. They did it wrong. So it's that thing of, we always want to be included in the highs, but we want to cut off the lows. And a lot of that can be explained by very simple, just self-esteem preservation here, where you don't want to associate yourself with it. But I think it's a very interesting concept to consider here in both sports fandoms and regular fandoms here, where everything at the end is a reflection of what's going on. You are feeling it, and you are entitled to feel it, and it's a great feeling. I have a lot of fantastic memories of watching amazing sports games and rooting for my teams when I was younger, and even still to this day. But there's a few from my childhood that still hold up to me, even when they weren't my team. I mean, I'll tell you what, John Elway's helicopter spin in the Super Bowl, that's going to stick with me for my entire life. But this is one of those things of the when there's something that isn't going right, and we, everybody's fair game for criticism, and I definitely think that is true. But there is that kind of line with it too, when you get into that sense of you're doing that corfing, you're cutting yourself off from it, where yesterday you were like us, and now it's them. So it's kind of a thing, I think, that if we are all a little more kind of cognizant of it, of when the negative comes out of what we're doing internally, we can still kind of get it out of our system and say that this, I think this should have happened, and analyze it. There's nothing wrong with that. But maybe a sense of calming ourselves at least a little bit so we're not destroying our cities.
Right. There's for
Yeah.
me, for me, there's a difference between being critical of a decision and then just straight up going on Twitter and then trying to just be abusive. You know, there's a very fine line with that, and some people don't exactly do a great job of like, you know, knowing that there's one line that you should not really cross. You know, for example, like, oh my God, this guy cost me the game or cost me the race. I'm gonna go and say, I hope your family dies, like some crazy junk like that. You know?
Yeah,
I
think social media has definitely changed that sort of part of the game and a lot of different sports as well, where that reactionaryism usually was reserved for like publications afterwards. This is something that the New York sports media is very well known for, where they would, if the Yankees did something stupid or they lost a series in the playoffs, they would get raked through the coals and New York Post. Yeah, yeah,
We'll call a
exactly.
spade,
Or
right?
you know, if they lost a really important series or they lost the Subway series, there'd be a guy on Mike and the Mad Dog the next day who's screaming about it. He's from like South Jersey. You're a Phillies fan, buddy. What are you doing on here? But no, yeah, it really is. It really that reactionism used to be that level where it was like, oh, somebody will come on the radio and say something stupid to Mike Francesa at some point. But now it's you have athletes who are on social media who there is that element of, oh, you got to interact with them. That's great. That's awesome. I think Derek Jeter tried to do something with that at some point recently when he retired. But it also opens up that sort of thing where it's like, oh, now people, hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people can go on social media and be reactionary about it and can be downright abusive about it at times. And again, that goes to what you're talking about, Ford, where it is so potent, that feeling of taking wins and basking in that high and taking those lows really close to heart, because it's you. Again, the team is not just a team anymore at that point. It's you. So then you need to blame them. It's really so much of that has become so much more intricate, I think, now that you have social media and that reactionism is kind of magnified, and those feelings are magnified, I think. I know on Sundays, whenever there's a really bad New York Football Giants game on Sunday, I know I retreat into my shell and I'm just like, I just don't want to talk about football right now. I don't want to think about it. It's a thing that happens. Totally.
That sounds like me. It's like if you're finishing 19th, you're a lap down and your car was junk, and it's like, what the heck are we doing wrong here? It's like, we got the playoffs coming up and we're bringing these kind of race cars to the track. Are you kidding me? This is the best we can do? So it's it's almost like it's a combination of just frustration of that moment, but also like looking down the road, it's like, oh my God, I know what's coming. And if we're not ready for this, we're going to get our butts kicked in.
There is a great quote from a film I saw. I'm bringing up film now. Here I am. This is
It was only a matter of time.
Shocking coming from you.
Yeah, right. Thank you. This is Film Horse speaking. There's a great quote from a film that I saw last year that was absolutely wonderful and applies in so many different ways. The Last Black Man in San Francisco. Excellent film. And there's a quote in there at some point where someone has a whole thing where they trash the city of San Francisco after about 2 hours of this film of recognizing the faults in the city, and the main character goes, "You can't hate it unless you loved it first." And that's really what it is when you critique like your team and you get really upset about that sort of thing to the level that we're talking about here. It really goes to that point that you wouldn't critique them like that if it just wasn't centered around your life like that, and if you didn't love them as much as you do. It sounds like you hate them, but really what it is that it really does sometimes sound like you hate them, but in the long run, it's no, I love them so much, and that's why I'm so angry.
I am so glad you say that, because I find that with with NASCAR with my driver Chase Elliott and his crew chief Alan Gustafson. It's like whenever he makes a bad pit call that kind of costs us a race or costs us a top 5, top 10, it's like, why the heck did we pit there, or why the heck we take 2 tires instead of 4 tires? But yet 6 hours later, when someone goes, no, we need a new crew chief, Alan Gustafson sucks, I'm like, okay, and who are you going to replace him with? Who's better out there that's better than Alan Gustafson right now? Then it's like dead silence. So it's like a combination of what the heck are you doing? But no, you still one of my guys. I'm going to back you up.
We brought up social media, and
Right.
that is a big thing right now. And we have spoken to this on previous episodes about vitriol thrown throughout it, and we've seen a lot of that, especially within fandoms and people who have gotten off of social media because of it. I know the actress who played Rose in Star Wars cut herself off from all social media because of all the hate that was getting thrown at her and such. And I'll start with you, Rose, on this one of what is it like? How is navigating social media to you these days because of the circles we travel in and the fact that vitriol exists out there?
I mean, honestly, I kind of just avoid circles where it would really happen. But I know, like, I wanted to get into art for the longest time. I feel like that vitriol is definitely a barrier to entry.
Mm-hmm.
So, as it were, I mean, like, I've seen someone wanting to or trying to commit suicide because they drew Rose Quartz slightly, skinny instead of more of like her normal self
Like
in the
her
show.
full-bodied, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, that's not cool.
And that's a thing, and I think that's a trapping we all get, because as much as we don't like to think that we do, our brains are kind of hardwired to think that we are right about everything.
It's true.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very simple to be like, this is my perspective of the world, and anything that challenges it, my brain doesn't like it, so I'm going to lash back out. And we see it all too often. And I think it really plays into sports in a lot of what we just talked about here, where it's very easy to lash out. And
There's... Right.
yeah, and it definitely is a thing that happens here. I feel like it's a tough path we walk nowadays, because
It's walking on eggshells, yeah.
yeah,
There's the old term that people still use today, the Monday morning quarterback,
mm-hmm.
where it's, I could have done this, you should have done this, because it's so easy to say what could have gone right in hindsight 24 hours since this thing happened.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine with New York Post, like, freaking doing all these articles scrutinizing every single thing player does. Like, I can't imagine how much pressure that those players are under, that it's like any little thing that they do will be all over the news and all over social media. Like, I would crack.
Oh yeah, sports is a cutthroat business. It is all about performance and results. If you don't bring those performance and you don't bring those results, you're gone. You can find someone else that can do that for you.
I feel the thing that gets added here, and that I definitely wanted to bring up at some point here, was the sense of competition that is inherent in sports directly. And that's one of the things where I feel sports takes sports and sports fandom to that upper echelon, or that next level, where it differentiates from some of the other pop culture fandoms here, because unless we force it, like people kind of force the Star Trek versus Star Wars debate. Let's face it, and
Yeah.
so, but our nature is to be competitive people, and that's literally our nature, because at our base we are hardwired to survive, not necessarily in the society we've built up, we're just built for survival. So a lot of our basic instincts are competition for resources and survival of the fittest and all of these base level things that are still a part of us that feeds right into part of what makes sports great, but also becomes dangerous at times of when does competition and the competitive sense take over and become too much. In sports especially, you have the idea of your rivals. And rivalries are great and makes the sport worth watching. One example I can do is I'm a Pittsburgh Penguins fan. That being said, I have an inherent, like, probably not healthy disdain for the Washington Capitals. But at the same token, it's like, and I'll say things in passing, but I would never ever actually come up to somebody and say something and look at them as less of a person. And I feel like there's a jovialness that you can have within rivalries, but there is that point where you take it too far. And I'm going to give a direct example of something that happened to me. So I got the opportunity years ago when I was in college to go to see the Pittsburgh Penguins against the Philadelphia Flyers in Philadelphia. Bottom line is the Flyers won. Penguins lost. I was just excited because it was like I got to see all these great players play live for once in my life. And, they didn't win, but it really didn't matter. The game was such that the Penguins were going to the playoffs anyway. The Flyers were already mathematically eliminated, so they were just kind of playing for the sake of the game at that point. And it was, even though my team lost, overall, the experience of going to the game was fun. However, behind me, there was a few, rowdy fans. One of which pointed out to anybody who was a Pittsburgh fan or at least noticed was wearing anything Pittsburgh or was rooting for them during the game. And I'm going to censor myself here, but he did not censor himself. He literally went and pointed to each individual person, including myself, and just went, F you, F you, F you, F you. And I'm like, dude, your team just won. What is necessary here? And I think that's the thing here that is a big point I kind of want to... we're nearing our time here, but there is that sense of enjoying the wonder of sports and becoming passionate about it and all of the things that can come from it. And there's so many great inspirational stories like what you said earlier, Balto.
Yeah.
At the same token, there is a point where we take it too personally and make it too personal about people. And the thing is that we're entitled to be a fan of our show, our property, our team, just as much as somebody else is it's their right to be a fan of something else. And I think that's the big thing at the end of the day, is even when we have rivalries, even when we don't line up, there is a sense of sportsmanship and respect for the individual that we need to hold to at the end of the day. And there's playful, jovial laughing about, oh, you're a fan of such and such, but there's a point where it can get too personal. And I think that's the challenge we all face right now is kind of taking it within ourselves and going, there's nothing wrong with loving the sport, loving the game, loving what we love, but knowing within ourselves when it goes beyond just the love of the game.
Right, you got to know those limits. You can't just be like F you to a whole entire fan base. It's so funny you mentioned that. I literally dealt with someone who literally said that to our entire TSLA fan base this morning. I'm just like, what is your deal, dude?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand that mindset. It's just it can't make you happier. There's no way. Like, I focus on things that make me happy, not things that piss me off,
Mm-hmm.
You'd just be better off doing that.
There's always, there's always the thing of the grass is greener on the other side that we all think about, and but we still have to try, even when even when your team is your team. Like, shout out to all you Browns fans out there who have been keeping with it all these years.
Oh my god.
Those poor souls.
I could never hate a Browns fan. I
No.
could never.
But that's the thing, though. Those are people I respect so much. Those are the people that are really in it for the love of the game.
Mhm.
You can tell.
Yeah.
Because they stick with it, no matter how
Yeah.
dire it looks. No matter how many
Yeah.
times you get knocked down or John Elway has the drive.
Yeah.
But there's a challenge, and I think that's the thing with this project, that if we all just challenge ourselves a little bit, doesn't have to be that much, just a little bit, to be cognizant of what's happening in our own brain, I think we can bridge these gaps that we have and be kind of a stronger, more united fandom, be a stronger, more united just race of people.
Yeah, to speak to that point you were making forward, I remember going to a doubleheader years ago between the New York Mets and the Miami Marlins. I don't think I'd ever seen a Marlins game in person up until then because I've just never been able to go down to Miami. Now I definitely can't. But was there for a doubleheader, and I just wore Marlins stuff because I was like, you know what, Mets fans aren't going to beat me up. Maybe in Boston, but Queens, Citi Field, I don't think I'm at risk. Back in the day, there was a guy who had a cheering crew there who would. There was a player on the Mets, first baseman, Lucas Duda. He might still be playing. I don't know. Is he, Balto?
Not as much. Not really. Yeah.
But he was a big star on the New York Mets at that point.
Absolutely.
And this guy with a big voice had a cheering crowd there where he would go "do" and everyone else goes "duh." It was great. He was a great guy. Had a powerful voice. You could hear it on broadcasts. And remember, after the two games, we had won. Marlins won the first one. Mets won the second one. I remember we're walking back through the concourse, and I remember this guy, unmistakable sounding voice. He walks up as I'm walking along, and he sees that I'm wearing a Marlins jersey, and it was great. And I always keep this memory in my mind because he immediately, rather than giving me crap or anything, because I'm wearing Marlins stuff, or that the Mets just won the second game as we're all walking out, and that's the feeling was, oh yeah, they won. He just goes to me, "We each got one today, right?" And I'm like, yeah, we did.
That's cool.
And that was great.
That's super cool.
That was
That's
such
awesome.
he could have easily have been a jerk because he was the big, loud cheering, crowd cheering kind of guy there, but he just went, "We got one and you got one, huh?" And I'm like, yeah, that was. I felt good about that. It was great.
I think that's really, I mean, that sums it up really in the end.
Yeah.
Aspire to be that guy, everybody. I think if we all try a little bit, not saying everybody has to change everything, but we all can strive to do better each day. So
And
it's-
if enough of us do that, it'll truly make a difference, you know. So
absolutely.
always try to put your best foot forward, or your hoof.
Definitely. So, looking at time, we've definitely kind of run the course on our time here today. So, I do want to thank everybody for joining us today for this lively conversation. Of course, my name is Ford Progress. You can find me on Twitter at KeepFriendMagic. And thank you all for continuing to support the podcast. You can also check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/KFM if you want to help continue this podcast and the other projects we have going on. I want to thank you, of course, Nova Rose, for joining us.
Yes, it's good. Thank you for having me again. You can find me at Nova Roselia on Twitter.
All right, and also I want to thank our special guest today. So, Balto, thank you so much for joining us. How can people find you?
Of course, it was so much fun to be on here. So you can, I keep it rather simple. You can find me at Balto Racing on Twitter, also on my YouTube channel, which is basically NASCAR videos. So subscribe, and then
like
also
and subscribe.
Right, and unrelated, I have a silly little Mirrored is Magic Twitter thing as well. So if you want to look at your favorite ponies mirrored, then there's that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Thoth Penswell, for joining us again here for a wonderful conversation.
Not a problem. This was amazing to get to talk about sports with people in the fandom, which I really don't get to talk about this often in the fandom. So getting to kind of nerd out and go on tangents about different stats and the Yankees and the Super Bowl and everything, that is a really rare and amazing opportunity. Hope we get to do it at a BabsCon sometime, because I know we were supposed to have a panel for that earlier this year, and I was so jazzed up for that because I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna get to be a big sports nerd in front of a bunch of pony people, and that would have
April
been
2021. It's gonna happen. Gotta
Yeah.
be positive.
I am so game, and I'm gonna come out there and get booed because I'm wearing a New York Yankees jersey. It'll be great. But, but yeah, you can. Yeah, this was great. You can follow me. You can follow me at Thoth Penswell on Twitter. I really don't do much on my personal. So what you can do, and that is more active, you can follow at Rift Ponies on Twitter. That's the thing that I mostly post on. We do panels and we do conventions, and we're kind of known for fuff, I guess.
We did that.
Other than that, let's go Yankees.
All right. So with that being said, I want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in once again. You make this show what it is, this project what it is. And as always, remember to keep friendship magic out there. Thank you all for tuning in.